I'm trying to. Oh, so Katie asked a few questions and was like helping prompt me with stuff. Is there anything that you wanted to know about, like either the world or you think that like people should know about the game, Dad?
Since we are dealing a lot with deities and things of that nature, what was your thought process on building a pantheon for your world?
Oh, that's a good one. So we've kind of
I went
touched.
to school for film. Asking questions is what I do.
That's amazing, actually. We touched a little bit on the deities before you hopped on.
Hmm.
So I have two pantheons, sort of. I have the old ones, which are an overarching group of seven deities who I've been using them in every campaign since I started homebrewing. Just because I like the idea of having a world that can restart in a way. They basically build and destroy the world over and over again, taking it through cycles. And I've been using them forever. But I also rotate out more focused pantheons. And the idea is that as the world's being created and people start forming different cultures and everything, pantheons spring up and evolve with those cultures. The current pantheon, I used the major arcana of the tarot deck as inspiration. And you see that a lot with their names, like the Fool, the Magician, the Star. And you see that a lot in the way that they're listed and the way they behave is very reminiscent of tarot. I'll be entirely honest. I got this idea from the Arcana, a Mystic Romance, and they have sort of a similar thing where the major arcana of the tarot deck are kind of deities. That's also kind of where the
We
idea
also
of
just
them
wanted the
being
deities to
like
be
quote
furries.
unquote furries comes from, is that all of the arcana, major arcana in that game are anthropomorphized. I did change up the animals that represent them just because I wanted to be original, and I changed up personalities and roles that certain ones play. I used the actual tarot as a slightly heavier reference than what the game itself uses, but just generally when creating a pantheon, I come up with sort of that skeletal structure. I come up with something to base it off of. Like, oh, elements. Another one that I'm building right now for a future campaign is I'm using color. Is just pick a starting point basically and build off around that. I like the idea that the society that creates these deities has a far greater impact on like who these deities are and how they develop than the societies do on the old ones, because the old ones are just these massive titans that are untouchable basically, or were untouchable, whereas the closer down to earth pantheon, the gods that people actually like have patrons of, those ones are, they're much more attached to the people and the identity of certain cultures and how they're perceived, I guess. Just like a small note, part of the reason why there are 22 deities in the world is that your guys' world is so old because it's the end of its cycle has been delayed for so long. And I think that that's a really cute like note on it. It's like it's been allowed to develop further and further than it usually would have.
Dope.
I really like rambling about things I'm passionate about, and D&D is like, especially world building in D&D is one of those really big things.
Yo, I completely get it. And I mean, when someone has passion for something, I want those vibes because you love the thing that you're talking about, and that needs to be exuded, you know.
I appreciate that. Both
Hmm.
Katie and I have kind of done like messages to the viewers. Is there anything that you want them to know personally? Like whether that be like something about you, something about the game, or anything that you think that they should know going in?
I know too much about this game for someone who does not play this game very much. So coming into this campaign, I had way more knowledge than anyone else did. So I do my best to keep that meta out of the game itself, but it does come through at some points, and I do apologize if that is the case. Yeah,
Um,
I play the game of D&D because, I mean, role-playing games in general, because I love the aspect of playing a role in a world. In my personal life, I LARP, live action role play, and it's a very different way of doing that, but it is very similar in that you have your character, it has its own world it's living in. You have that character has skills that it uses to be living in that world, and the world grows around you. You also interact with other people who also have those characters, and you bounce things off of each other while you're playing that character to also enhance that world that you're living in. So as a tabletop RPG, you don't necessarily have you embody the character, yes, but not in a physical sense. More in a virtual sense, I guess would be the best way of putting that. So you have to use your creative brain, and being a creative person, having that outlet of using your creative brain to work out things like puzzles and personal interactions with characters that don't necessarily exist, um, is just a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Honestly, I love that take. Oh, Katie, I see that you've unmuted. Did you have something to say?
I did. I was just gonna add too that like we joke about all the trauma we put our characters through because we do, and it's all part of telling a story. But like we do also have a good time over here. Like
For
we're
sure.
not just all trauma. We do also have
Trauma's
laughs too.
part of that.
So just
Yeah, and
felt like that needed to be put out there.
we've called this game Tabletop Trauma, yes, but as a group, we've grown to in the short time that we've played together to care for each other and make sure that we're all okay. And terrible things may happen, but we're always checking in, making sure we're good, making sure nothing too bad has happened.
I mean, honestly, I feel like to tell like this kind of story and do it well, especially like at the level that we want to do, we have to have like a pretty high level of trust in each other too. And just like
For sure.
trust and just,
I mean, that's why we have the safe word, which
yeah.
For other like D&D players out there, I 100% suggest having a safe word for your game, because like especially if it's something like what we do, because we get into some pretty heavy shit sometimes. If someone gets too uncomfortable or they get to a point where they like physically cannot continue, it's really important to have a way out, a way to like bring everything to a complete stop.
And especially if it's like an emotional role play part, like who's to tell like what the difference is between just acting and then like actual real emotions too? Like sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. So it's good that like
but it's also
know,
good to have boundaries in place beforehand as well. Before we started this game, we all said, here's things that I'm not necessarily okay with. Here's things that I would like to see in the game that we're playing. And having that safe word as well on top of the stuff you already spoken about is good is good in tandem with each other, so that you're not sort of throwing something at someone out of nowhere.
Also, sometimes there's also the potential like you don't know something will bother you until you're
sometimes
actually,
there's
in the
sometimes
moment
there's nerves that may get hit that you don't know are there, and that's why we have the safe word. Like that's a lesson I had to learn the hard way in Dungeons and Dragons. Is at one point I did step over the line and I had no way of knowing. Nobody was able to tell, nobody knew how to tell me to stop at that point. And we did talk about it afterwards and things did wind up working out, but after that point I knew I wouldn't be able to like handle myself properly if that ever happened again. And that's kind of where I started using safe words a lot. Making players uncomfortable is sometimes a necessity, at least if you want to have a particular type of game, but pushing them beyond what they're okay with is absolutely not okay. And I do personally think it's kind of inexcusable, especially if you do it repeatedly. And that's where the importance of like setting up boundaries and safe words come in.
Safety in a game space is always necessary no matter what you are doing.
I feel like people joke a lot about like the terminology between tabletop role playing and like kink life being very similar, like with the dungeon master and like stuff like that.
But I mean, they are very similar,
Yeah, there's
honestly.
a lot of trust that goes into both of them, and there's a lot of crossover. And I feel like it's okay to admit that that like, yeah, you're putting a lot of trust regardless of which one you're talking about in your dungeon master. And that's kind of where like I honestly have drawn a lot from what my understanding of kink life is, and like from what I've learned of it in order to make my games better. And I do, honest to God, think that my games are better for what I've learned from it.
Some kink can be funny, and some role-playing games can be kinky. It's just how it works.
It's how it happens. And Mom and Dad, again, final time. I'm sorry if you've listened to this far.
Also, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that we've said life is a dating sim, but with trauma.
Oh my God.
You're gonna have to
Bruce,
listen to
I don't
this
think you were here
back.
for this. I promised to send my father this. Once this is up on YouTube, he's gonna see it.
Have a good time
Hi,
with
Jasper's
that. It's really
dad. I love you. Oh, and Jasper's mom. Hello.
Hi, Jasper's dad.
Hi, Mom. If you've made it this far, I'm not sure if you have, but if you did, thank you. And thanks to Dad if you've made it this far.
We appreciate you.
I'm sorry. I hope you're proud of me.